this is going to sound a little nutso after what we just talked about, but I kind of remember the parts up until the time when Max gets shot installing your head. I remembered those better.
But that makes a lot of sense to me because a lot of the novel up to that point was a lot of the bureaucratic, a lot of the historical, a lot of like the deep research. And yeah, your suggestion of it being almost split in two makes a lot of sense to me because after that is where we get into so much. I mean, like you have the entire. Why would you choose to remember the part about the manor?
Hi, and welcome back to the Big Book Project. I'm really pleased to have a return guest with us, Tom Flynn, and he's been on with us a few times, most recently to talk about The Kindly Ones. But now, Tom, we are ready to talk about the ending of this book because this is our final week of reading. And wow, what an ending!
Yeah, I mean, I said this last time, Lori, but you sure pick them. That is one of the uh, strangest, wildest. I mean, it's such. This is such a strange book. But that the last like 30 or so, 40 or so pages of this are just something like there's a frenetic energy to it, and then it is sort of the book stops, and you're just it's really it's it's a book that can be discombobulating at times in a lot of respects, but how it ends is just jarring as hell. And yeah, it's something.
I guess I'm curious. I feel like those last pages that you talked about are they just feel different to me than the rest of the book, and I'm not quite sure it works. It feels to me almost like he was trying to get someone to buy the movie rights or something. I mean, just like the fact that those two investigators like pop up like
Yeah.
as the train, the underground tunnel is flooding, and then you know the one guy that like he doesn't kill, pops up again, and then Thomas kills that guy Clemens, and it almost just felt like I was watching, an action flick where all of these super ridiculous things are happening. And I'm curious what you think. Is Littell trying to make us laugh at the end? I mean, is he just saying, screw it, this book has been like so serious and and depressing that now I'm just gonna like be, off the hook?
I I mean there are different points though throughout the novel where he's been not off the hook in the same manner, but like done similar things, right? Like his sister's house and that fever dream he goes through. Um, how Max is reporting reality in the wake of the gunshot to the head. So like there is this feverish like, and each time it's just a little bit different. This one definitely felt much more like the action movie, like the climax of the action movie with all the fighting and the back and forth, but it also feels like he's trying to pull together all the so many of these threads at the very end there, and it feels like the book got it feels like the book got out of hand, like he lost control, and so to just basically like wipe the board clean. I mean, because like he runs into everyone he should run into in Berlin in that last period, right? Like he runs into Mandelbrot and Leland, who are about to flip in order to continue to ply their trade as whatever whatever creatures of the land they happen to be, as it's pretty clearly established that these guys probably shouldn't still be alive, given their respective ages, right? Or at least not look the way they do. Um, and then he runs into the detectives. Thomas. I mean, we're so used to Thomas appearing out of nowhere for no reason that it's like it's fun. That's the funny part. It's natural that Thomas would show up in that moment and save him, right? And save him in multiple ways. Saves him from the immediacy of being murdered, but then through his through Max's murder of Thomas, he saves him again because now Max can pass into France and move into a new life and leave his life behind him. Um, though it's suggesting that maybe that's not possible for Max at the end. I don't know. It just I agree that I don't know if it entirely works, but I don't. There's so many elements of this novel that I'm not entirely sure how well they work or how well they all fit together at the end of the day.
Yeah, there's definitely, I think, a pacing problem here with this novel
Yes.
because you mentioned there are lots of bizarre things about this book and lots of bizarre parts of the novel, and that fever dream at his sister's house, apart from being just like really disgusting, um, it goes on forever.
Yeah.
And then it almost feels like he was like, keeping his editor like up to date, sending in like drafts as he was like finishing them. And then at some point, you know, his editor said, You just have to wrap this thing up. This is like, this is out of hand." And so those those earlier parts don't have this kind of cinematic quality, I think, as these very last 2 dozen, 3 dozen or so pages have. That just, I mean, I found myself like gasping, with my mouth kind of like ajar, and then just like laughing and giggling at some points too. Nothing about it is very funny necessarily, but it's just the way it's happening is, I just found pretty ludicrous.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess ultimately it didn't like completely take me out of it because I've kind of had to leave a lot of expectations behind over the course of this novel. I think so. It and I don't know. I think that the narrative, like the tale that Max is trying to tell in order to justify himself and to defend himself, which ultimately, like, I mean, that it was set up as such from the very beginning, but as it moves through and as the theme of the kindly ones continues to recur, I think you get a better sense that this is him entering in his defense, right? Um, I think it always needed to end the moment that he leaves Germany, that he exits the war, that he exits that life. That is the end point. And to do it in such an abrupt manner, I think probably does make sense. Like, we don't really need to hear about the next 20 years. Like, that's not his argument. Um, but yeah, I mean, the only section that had anywhere near the same pacing was when he was in Russia, and dodging bombs and snipers and all that. But it was not the but and the pacing is the wrong word. A similar sort of scenario of being like in a full on war zone, bullets flying, people dead everywhere. Um, but the pacing was radically different. Like, that was a slog, right? And that had it was yeah, that was disturbing in its own way, but it made sense for that. This ending just I cannot imagine that there was a scenario that he was being told he had to wrap it up. But I don't know. Maybe it is some. Maybe you're right. Maybe the editor is like, "You're never going to stop writing this unless I make you." So just bring it to an end.
Well, but what you just said creates an interesting question in my mind. So yeah, the Stalingrad part is a slog, but that actually was a slog of a battle. I mean, it happened. It lasted for over a year, and it was just like uh, never ending. Whereas, I don't know, perhaps in some ways, Littell is mirroring reality with the structure of the novel, because I do get the sense that at some point with Berlin, and the capitulation of the Nazis, like they hung on and then it just started like falling apart like super fast. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't know whether that's whether he's intentionally trying to mirror that in terms of like how it all kind of just ends quickly.
Right, like it's gone on this long and then it all comes like and it's falling apart. I mean, there's a comment where Max reflects on the idea that they won't be looking at Berlin as it's being bombed progressively more and more, that they won't see it restored in their lifetimes. There's too much damage that's been done to the buildings that it's going to be the work of generations to fix this place. And then so it's getting beat up. People are throwing parties every night because it's the end of the world, and so at night, whether there are bombs dropping or not, you get drunk and have sex and so on. But then when it all comes to an end, it all comes to a crashing end. And I think that's an interesting point and an interesting way of looking at some of the elements of the novel, like even the fever dream component, right? It's that sort of very quiet period as things are falling apart before it goes absolutely to pieces in a matter of moments, right? But I don't, and so if Littell was attempting to kind of mirror some of those elements with how the novel's paced and the different sections, that's interesting to me. I don't know if it's effective for the reader. Like I think that there's that tension between what you're trying to accomplish and get across on some sort of meta or just like larger theoretical level, and whether it's actually practically it works. And I mean, the fever dream would have to be the scene in the villa would have to be, or the manor rather, would have to be, I don't know, like 30 pages shorter for me to feel like we're in range of it working, because that just went on forever and ever.
Yeah, that was too long. I agree with you totally. Okay, what about biting Hitler's nose?
I mean, so we talked about this a bit last time, that I don't necessarily love going into like the psychoanalysis of characters and that whole sort of thing. But when we last spoke, the murder of his stepfather and mother had not occurred as yet. And at the end of this book, we have a very sudden and violent action taken against probably the only person in the world who actually takes care of and has always taken care of him. Um, so I don't know. I think this is just a guy that, like, Max is just not a particularly stable person, and for whatever reason, the combination of Hitler not being tall enough and him being, you know, this is the end of the novel. This is the end of his time, and he's done all these things, and he's been recognized, and he's being recognized by the highest authority in this organization that he's pledged himself to and justified his actions for. Um, and the person is not impressive enough in some way, and that triggers some sort of physical response. And in this case, it's to bite a bulbous nose. I mean, I read that sentence over a couple of times, and I didn't get anything especially like racialized about it in terms of like what Max might have been thinking in terms of seeing it. I think it was, if anything, is just he's frankly just insane on some level. Like this is a very broken individual, and impulse control is clearly out the window at this point.
Yes, it is. I I thought that the scene setting around that was really pretty masterful. You've got
Mm,
like, Hitler's bunker and everyone is sloshing around in this water. You've got these guys like the last men standing in Berlin that are called in, and you know they try to bring in everyone that they can in the hierarchy, and there's only still like 30 or 40 people that they can locate. They decide um, to give this award, this medal, to like 10 of them. And Thomas explains to Max, well, it was really just that we're the only ones that, that of the higher echelon that are here, and so that's the only reason that we're getting this distinction. So I thought that that was all good. I was also curious, though, he bites his nose, and then of course there's outrage, and immediately like paranoia about this is the act of someone that's involved in a plot to kill the Fuhrer. And so he mentions a couple times that none of the historians that have written about these last days in Berlin have ever like mentioned this incident of the nose biting, which I thought was, I guess, kind of clever that he like threw that in there. But yeah, I don't know what possessed Littell to kind of like throw that incident into the book.
I mean, in fairness to him, if you're trying to get to let's assume that the book is ending the way he rather intended it to, right? That he's going to murder Thomas and steal Thomas's backup identity, and these detectives are going to be disposed of such that they can't continue to pursue him, even into this new false life. Um, having him having him bite the Fuhrer's nose and get tortured and thrown into jail, and that which leads to an escape in this madcap thing. Like that could be an instance of like working backwards, right? Okay, here's where I want to be. How do I get there? It doesn't feel like it. If that's what it was, like it almost. I don't know. There's just a bizarre logic at that point to Max biting Hitler's nose that I couldn't possibly explain to you why it makes sense to me. But I guess better say it doesn't shock me that that would be like the outcome of this meeting, for whatever reason. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's in a very strange book. It's one of the stranger moments, but it feels more like an afterthought to me than, and it shouldn't be, right? Like this guy is a Nazi. This guy has been working on all these projects, like very closely connected with the final solution, and the various things he's exploring that would be alternative, all this stuff. And so here he is at the like center of this power that's about to just be completely wiped away, and it feels like an afterthought in the larger narrative, and I think that's kind of neat. I also just wonder if Littell is trying to throw in just like how no historian could possibly nail what those last days were like in Berlin. Like as much documentation as there is, as much as there were accounts, it's too chaotic. It's too broken. It's like who shot whom, when, how. Like, did Hitler have like a healing wound on his nose when after that he was discovered if he shot himself? Like none of these things can you actually like really figure out. And so I think there are a few ways that he's kind of as brilliantly researched as this novel is. I think he is deliberately leaving room for ambiguities and the ambiguities of reality, that histories can't quite always accomplish, right? Like the minutia of the everyday life. So there could be that too, or or maybe he just wanted to bite Hitler's nose and so he did it. I don't know.
Yeah. One thing that you said makes a lot of sense to me in terms of um, this is kind of just the culmination of this guy's descent into madness. I mean, he's lost it. He's lost. I think you said he's lost all control, and we see that too with his murder of that guy that propositions him at the
Mm-hmm.
party and follows him into the bathroom, and he just with that's kind of one of the only times I believe that I, or maybe the only time I can remember, unless you count the murder of his mother and Moreau, which I guess you can debate whether or not he actually murdered them, but I think he did. But like it was like that was a very unprovoked murder of that guy. Like it wasn't in self-defense. Um, he didn't need to do that. He could have just said, get your hands off me, and left rather than murdering this diplomat. But he murders him in a very very grisly way and very efficiently
Yeah.
cleans up after himself,
Uh,
which does, I think, kind of lead back to the murder of of his mother and Moreau, which obviously was enough for the French authorities not to investigate it further. I mean, he covered his tracks seemingly pretty well with that. So yeah, he has totally lost it. Any thoughts on why he murders that particular guy?
Well, it's certainly very clinical in a way that, like, the murder of Thomas just sort of seems to be, it almost feels like a happenstance, right? Thomas is bent over in front of him. He sees a heavy iron bar. He grabs it. He kills him. He moves on with his day. And we'll get to like that's like the last sentence of the second to last paragraph, and the next paragraph is, bring some other things into it. But this one is like, I mean, it's described in gruesome detail that he knocks him down, he knocks him out, he chokes, he suffocates him basically with, and maybe breaks his neck using a mop of all things, and then uses that same mop to clean up after himself, and also describes how he's able to lock the door from the inside, so that it doesn't look like, so it's even harder to figure out what's going on there, and the guy isn't discovered for a bit. Um, I, Max has a very complicated, I hesitate to use confused because I don't know if that's the right word, but very complicated sexuality. And I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, but Mahai, Mahai is the name of the guy he murders, is coming on to him. And yes, he has had sex with men throughout this novel, but I don't think he considers himself gay. I don't think he considers himself as some. And when he has done so, it has been either him in a dominant position or him seeking protection. It is not something that he was necessarily seeking out, or at least as he presented it, for sexual gratification. So the idea of being flirted with and come on to, I think that's part of it. And he makes a specific point of how the guy was coming on to him in front of everybody. And I think that was, I mean, it is the dying days of the Nazi regime, but it's still not safe to be homosexual. So, I mean, unless you're a diplomat with a country that the Germans need. Um, so, I mean, and also again, but that's also getting a lot of like a reading into who he is or what he also might have just wanted to kill the guy. Like, this is not someone who, like, I think at this point in the novel, Max has been established as someone who will go to great pains to explain to you everything he's seeing and inflect uncertainty as to whether this was real or not, or this or that. And so it gives this notion that this is a well considered, ordered mind. But we also have had so many instances of him just acting, especially in completely seemingly random acts of violence, extreme violence at that, and extremely violent thought processes. He, goes from expressing absolute love and devotion for his sister to the most horrific descriptions of violent, awful sex that sounds closer to rape than it does to anything consensual. So this is a very scary individual at the end of the day. So I mean, I think you can kind of read it both ways. And I think that's something that Littell wants you to be able to do. He doesn't want you to settle on anything when it comes to Max. And he accomplished that goal, I think, in the writing.
Yeah, we still are left a little bit scratching our heads about him. Let's talk about the Lord of the Flies moment when
No.
Max Max and Thomas and the driver are kind of ambushed by this roving pack of 70 kids that are uh, orphaned, feral, extremely violent. Um, I guess I didn't think it seemed too far fetched to think that in some of these war zones, like in order to survive, these bands of kids like this actually did exist. And perhaps you've read accounts or you've heard about this before, but I've not.
Um, I mean, I think I've read about it before. I do know that, like in the post-war period, in orphanages, there were acts of cannibalism, like that children did to each other. That one weaker child was ripped apart by the other kids because they were feral, they were starving to death. I mean, I think that's recounted in Tony Jute's post-war, his history post. Um, which I'm saying I think because it was told to me by a fellow bookseller because I did not have the stomach for reading about that particular period at that time. Um, but also, I mean, it doesn't really strike you as surprising, right? Like at this point, the German state has fallen apart. It's collapsing on every front. Um, he at that time is in a slightly further out district of it as well. So those it's been part of the front. So yeah, a lot of those kids are orphaned, and you know, in some ways, better to take off for the woods and try and survive there than wait for your town to get rolled over by the Russians, right? And you put a bunch of kids in that scenario and it can go real bad real fast, and it clearly did. The descriptions of when the kids made camp and how three of the older boys would grab one of the younger girls and rape her, and that some of the prepubescent girls looked pregnant. It was, yeah, it was horrifying. um Not
But
exactly how I wanted to exit the manor and everything that happened there, to go straight into the woods to hook up with a very broken version of Peter Pan and the Lost Boys, but here we are.
yeah, uh, it's interesting though um, that Thomas is the savvy one in that situation as well, because the driver is just like, you know, shut up, you stupid kids, leave us alone, get out of here. But Thomas sees something, seemingly like right away, like, oh, we need to treat these kids seriously or they're going to kill us all.
Right. And also, these kids can actually get us to where we need to go. Like, if these kids are a pack this large and picked us up, and then they witness them murder those Russian soldiers, like with incredible efficiency for being children. Yeah, I mean, Thomas has always had the most sense, right? And he's always been the best at reading the situations. I mean, he also doesn't feel impulsive the way that Max does. Almost as if Thomas is functioning as something of a super ego, to put it in Freudian terms, in his relationship with Max. Which, not we can stick with the kids conversation a bit more if you want, but back to our earlier conversation. Do you think Thomas is real? Because at the end of this novel, I kind of don't think he is.
Wow, really? I've always thought Thomas was real, but I do think he's the devil. He's the he's the suave guy that tries to put lipstick on the pig of evil. Like
Mhm.
he's a narcissist. He just wants to be comfortable and a dandy and lead an easy life. So he doesn't really have a conviction or soul. He just kind of like, yeah, if that's going to be expedient for me to do and say these things, to make myself look good and be potentially promoted, of course that's what I'm going to do. And I don't really care who I leave in my wake. The only exception to that really seems to be Max. For whatever reason, he always is looking out for Max. But tell me, I'm very interested in the Unreal Thomas
Well, I mean,
theory.
it, it it strikes me that, like, I mean, for a lot of what you just described, like what you just described in some respects is Max. right? Like Max is always figuring out how to justify like this notion versus that notion. He's trying to he bases it in the notion of the Volk and a lot of the Nazi thought, and he has that whole bit about the Kantian ethics and really pushing back against it and going back to the Greeks in the sense of justice and, you know, knowledge or lack thereof does not remove the stain of the crime, and the crime must still be, you know, punished, etc. But like, and so he has, Max has that ability, except for all of these really debilitating obsessions that he has, you know, with his father, with his mother, with his sister, like with his these family components to it. But every step of the way, when something needs to happen to move Max up the hierarchy, or to protect him from something or other, whether that's physical or again like institutional, Thomas appears. You know, if Max hadn't been able hadn't been freed the way he was, I would have expected Thomas to show up with grenades and like blow up the side of the jail to get him out or whatever. Like Thomas Thomas is such an intermediary and works on Max's behalf. Even Thomas's jobs were to Max's credit. Like they helped him. Him being in Stalingrad makes no sense, and yet there he is, and he's there to keep Max moving. Um, and at the very end, his last action, his last two actions are to kill the person that would pursue Max for the rest of Max's life, and then to be killed by Max to give Max a new life. And in the moments after killing Thomas is when is when the kindly ones are first invoked. Like they close out the novel. Um, so I'm just quoting. I'm just going to read the last like two sentences. I was sad, but didn't really know why. I felt all at once the entire weight of the past, of the pain of life, and of inalterable memory. I remained alone with the dying hippopotamus, a few ostriches, and the corpses, alone with time and grief and the sorrow of remembering, the cruelty of my existence and of my death still to come. The kindly ones are on to me. Now, the kindly ones are not onto him in his estimation until after he murders Thomas. Not because even if he didn't remember killing his mother, it's still a matricide. The kindly ones should still be onto him after that. So is it because in this moment, this externalized being that was absorbing all of that for him is now gone, and so now he can finally feel the weight of the kindly ones? Now they're no longer in the form of these two detectives, but they're now like something else that's going to haunt him enough that he now feels the need, Max does, to write 1,000 pages defending himself from a life that maybe no one would ever have known about if he hadn't said anything. And also, so anyway, do I 100% believe that Thomas isn't real? In a way, I don't care. I think it's a really interesting thought exercise about what Littell is trying to do here, and I think it has some backing. Like obviously, Thomas interacts with other characters, but by the time this whole novel within the, you know, the fictionalized context around it is written by someone who was shot through the head, you know, 30 plus years ago, and even before that seemed to be having some very like significant um issues. So why couldn't there now be someone who was working on his behalf, someone who's protecting him, someone who brought him all the way through? I don't know. I think it's a valid reading. I don't know that I 100% I even 100% buy it, but I think it opens up some interesting paths of conversation, or even just thought about what is happening in this novel. What is he trying to do? What trying to do? I hate that term, but what is he in fact trying to do? I mean, your conversation with Dorian Stuber, I thought was really interesting on that point of like, why the hell does this novel exist? You know, and yeah, that was a good one. I really enjoyed that combo you had.
Oh, thank you. Well, you know, I think your premise or your hypothesis has a lot of merit. I guess where where it seems to where the problem that I have with it is that we we're we're led by the writing, and again we might have a very unreliable narrator here because how reliable is this guy? But you know he he's not a politically savvy guy. We learn this, he tells us this over and over again. Like, he's not getting promoted nearly as fast as Thomas is. That Thomas really can always read the room. He reads the room with the Lord of the Flies kids too. There's no
Mhm.
room, but he immediately instinctively knows, okay, like I these kids are cold-blooded killers and really violent, but I need to play pretend radio operator with them, to like make sure that they don't kill us. It's That is like a really surreal moment. I think that these kids are like so bloody and horrible, and yet they're still like playing these games. But
They're still children. Like at the end of the day, they are still kids. Like they don't
exactly.
have all the experience and savvy necessarily to figure some of that stuff out.
But going back to the discussion with Dorian, one of the things that memorable kind of thoughts that Dorian raised was the fact that you know Max seems kind of like Forrest Gump. Like, he's
Mhm.
always like showing up, like how many really is it even humanly possible for one person to have had all of these experiences and all these different fronts and all of these different positions uh, during the war? And obviously Thomas is quite the Forrest Gump himself, because as you noted, like he's always there when it seems that Max is backed into a corner or might be about to die.
Yeah, yeah, or thrust into a new situation where he needs someone to guide him around by the hand a bit, right? Um, so yeah, I don't. The Forrest Gump thing, I think, is great. I think that's a really that's. I mean, it's fun in a very odd sort of way to make that association. Um, it also kind of fails because the Forrest Gump of the book is he's not just a table tennis savant. He's also a chess champion. He's like he's all these things that are part of the explanation for and part of the explanation for how Forrest Gump can go all these places is because he has all these like very specific special skills that then send him to the USSR and send him this place and send him that place that obviously get allotted from a movie because you need to streamline like crazy. Similarly, I think that the argument about how does Max get to all these places is he gets shot in the head. Like if Max walked through all these war zones and was never really badly wounded or never hurt in some way, we'd call bullshit, right? But the moment he's shot through his head, a lot of other things start to fall into place differently, and it kind of makes some more sense as to okay, well now he's going to be only on office work, so he's going to be moved into this field, and now he's going to be moved to this spot, and this is how he comes to the attention of Himmler, and so on and so on and so on. So like you know, I think there are ways in which this novel doesn't work. I think it's unwieldy. I think it is. I think you posited this in one of your Substacks that it might be too long, and I think that's probably accurate. I think something that makes a William Volman epic look tidy and compact has got has got some conversations to be had about its length. Um, but whatever other reservations I have about the novel overall, Littell really gets how he gets the craft. Like he gets how to get reader buy-in on some really important elements. And I think that example of like, I mean, I think the shot on the head serves so many functions, but I mean, it wasn't really until you were talking about brought the Forrest Gump thing again, but that grounded Max's reality in the war. Like it gave even more teeth or traction is probably a better way of putting it, traction to him moving through the Nazi state apparatus.
You mean the shot in the head?
Yes, the shot in the head, like the reality of him being in a war zone and being shot and being wounded, it really makes, in my mind at least, it makes it feel much truer that he was, in this war, that he was in all these theaters of combat in the war, that he was able to move around the space so much, not just like the conversations about the bureaucracy and moving through and moving up in the world, but like there's something about the idea that like he does get badly wounded that kind of grounds the rest of the narrative, at least for me.
Well, I guess I'm a little bit confused because I guess I was thinking that maybe you were making the argument that Max gets shot in the head in Stalingrad, right? Almost
Right.
dies.
Yeah.
And then perhaps you could even like say, okay, now part two of this novel is going to be this kind of like fantastical, like Forrest Gump-esque, like nobody could be in all these places and do all these things. So here's a guy that kind of is now making up reality and making up the involvement of his friend Thomas as well, because he's kind of totally not altogether in his right mind anymore because of this physical impairment.
I guess I'm trying to have my cake and eat it too. I guess I'm kind of saying both. I guess I'm saying that the reality of him taking that kind acquiring that kind of an injury, um for me, grounds the idea of this as a war novel, and this is someone who's moving through theaters of war, and if he never got anything worse than like an upset tummy because the food's bad, then I don't really buy it as much. But I get so I guess this is where it's actually kind of like converging. But I also don't think you can treat the second half of the novel as being like now everything's gotten weirder because he's impaired, because he's writing this from the future. So the whole thing would have been written by someone who is impaired. So I think you can make sort of like a split at that moment, but it doesn't quite work in terms of it going backwards. So I guess I would say that if there's one bit of reality within the context of this novel, like yeah, the reality of the fiction, blah blah blah, it probably is the gunshot wound. Like he was shot, and that meant that he was able to that he got moved into different departments and was put on this different path than he would have been otherwise. But it also means that his brain has been permanently altered since jump.
Yeah, yeah,
So, so
interesting.
I don't know. It's I feel like that argument is a little bit messier than my Thomas isn't real argument. I feel like that one has more legs to stand on.
Thomas as the shadow puppet. I like it. So what what is going on with the sister? Like we don't, and do we think that like Max really hasn't had any, I can't remember him having or talking about having a recent relationship with the sister in the prologue part where he's telling us that he's going to like tell us the history of what happened to him during the war. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I mean, he does talk about the fact that like he's just married this French woman for convenience, and he's never going to love her because he only loves one person, and that's his sister. But what is the deal with these twins? Are they his kids? Are they Moreau's kids? Whose kids are they?
Yeah, because the timeline doesn't quite work, right? They don't never give like they say the twins are like 7 or 8, right? And he meets them in 1944, if I'm remembering the timeline correctly. Is that
43, 44?
um and when he saw his sister in Zurich, that was in 30. Unless I mean, I could have the numbers messed up, and I feel like the meeting in Zurich was the last time that he suggests, or somewhat definitively suggests that they had sex. Um, though it's often suggested that they never had vaginal intercourse. I don't know. It's so weird. Like it's such a it just and like on some level I get why it's like I guess on some level I understand keeping it or how messy it is because that's where the fractures in his mind and memory seem to be most prominent. Like he can recount in excruciating detail all this bureaucratic information, but once you get into conversations around his family, it gets very messy. Fine, I guess, but it gets a little frustrating and a little the obfuscation feels irritating after a certain point when it comes to that relationship and whether the kids are his or what I guess I would just operate under the assumption that they are but yeah I don't know that one that yeah I'm not really sure what to do with with the incest angle and his sexual and romantic desires it just it feels simultaneous. It is key to how the novel moves and functions. It also I feels very messy, but not in a useful way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that that's probably the most uncomfortable part of the book is this mixing within the character of Max, this sexual perversity, and then this um you know, this awful participant in the atrocities and the genocide of World War II. It it feels like an uncomfortable uh, pairing to me because, and I think that maybe we discussed this in our past interview or video together that I don't get the sense that Littell is trying to excuse Max uh, or alternatively to say that the sexual stuff explains why Max was able to participate in the Holocaust, but yeah, it's troubling.
Yeah, I mean it. I agree. I think that Max's uh, sexual desires, all that. Uh, I don't. I do not think that's being presented as some sort of explanation or hand waving away. I think, but that cuts back to okay, this novel exists and it's using Nazi Germany and the Holocaust and a officer who is deeply involved in all of that as the protagonist, and then you're going to throw this element into it. So is this a so what again? What are you trying to say? What are you trying to do with that? Is it that it takes all stripes? I mean, there is a line. It's especially in the section where he's talking about page 592 when he's digging into a lot about this is the Kantian ethics section, all that. But he does say I'm trying to find, and it's such a pain. There we go. It's such a pain to find one sentence in the density of text on any of these pages if you don't mark it up. So if you wish to judge German actions during this war as criminal, it's all of Germany you have to call to account, not just the dulls, referring to the one of the other characters. Um, and that's going back to this idea of like justice and that stripping away Judeo-Christian ideas and all of that. And I think by the end of the way that this novel ends versus the way it begins, I think by the end of it, Max in some ways has given up on his claim to having it's been long enough since I read the beginning. I'm trying to remember if he actually does try to argue that there's a certain level of innocence to him. but I don't think it's that.
No, as I recall, it's not that he's trying to say I'm not guilty. He's trying just to throw a blanket over everyone and say we
Right.
are all universally guilty because if in the I was going to say right circumstances, but if in the wrong specific circumstances you or anyone would act very much the way that I acted and the Germans acted.
It's almost like saying like, yes, I am guilty, but everyone's guilty, and so I have less culpability as a result of that because everyone was, I think by the end of the novel, especially when he says the kindly ones are coming after him, I don't think that's the case any longer. I don't. That may have been where he started from, but by the end and in the writing of it, you know, imagining playing out this fiction further, um, he finds that he, and maybe not for what he did in the service of the Nazi Party and the German state, but in what he's done personally, justice is coming for him at the end, um, or punishment of some more punishment. I mean, the Furies, it depends on which version you're dealing with, whether it's justice or punishment that they're doling out. Um, yeah, I don't know.
There is this kind of I don't know, sickening sense of momentum that I think it builds up in the last, oh, I don't know, maybe 300 pages of the book, where where a number of high-ranking SS and army military people um, within Germany talk about the fact that, oh, this is so bad what we've done, and the world is going to find out what we've done, that we've got to go all the way, right? We can't just stop here because we're screwed anyway. We've got to take this to the limit, to the end, because anything other than like total victory, and we've put ourselves in a position that we're if we start trying to take our foot off the gas pedal, or try to be a little nicer now to maybe the gypsies, or some of these other groups, it's kind of too late. We've passed that Rubicon already. Like we are going to be just blamed and persecuted for these crimes. And maybe there's a little bit of a personal sense to Max as well, that he just at some point, maybe after he kills his mother and his stepfather, is maybe he just like knows that unless he builds a new life for himself totally, and can convince everyone that he's was never involved in any of this, that he might as well just like continue going like down the tubes, because it's like there's no turning back.
Yeah, I think I think though that Max also had a certain amount of inertia, like especially like in terms of his career, which is part of why he didn't rise the way he needed to. Um, and he had to ask others to intercede for him to make that happen. Mandelbrot doing that, or Thomas doing that in different ways. Um, but yeah, when it comes to it strikes me as interesting, I guess, that he by the end of the novel he still has no memory that he murdered his mother and stepfather, right? But and he absolutely has a clear memory and discusses in clean detail how he went about murdering the diplomat in the bathroom. But the moment that he murders Thomas is the moment that not only is the weight of everything that comes rushing down upon him, um, but it's also that's when the kindly ones are after him. That's when he has broken the rules that require divine justice. Um, and yeah, and I think you're right. I think that's absolutely what I think. I think it's more of that is what he's running from. That he runs into this new life in order to escape from the justice that's coming for Max Alle. You know, that he needs to be a different person and disappear, and not because of the crimes he committed as a Nazi, but because of everything else he's been, in a way, which is weird. But I think that might be kind of more where I'm falling in terms of what he's thinking of in terms of that sense of justice coming. Because then yeah, I mean, I don't think he would disagree. I don't think he did disagree with anyone about like how terrible the crimes they committed were and what was coming for them should they lose when they lost. But it never really seemed to bother him that much. You know, I mean, this is also a guy who is standing in front of Himmler, who is complaining about the daytime bombings and hitting civilians, and that after we win, we'll have to put the people who killed civilians recklessly on trial for war crimes. And it's like, my guy, like, you know, I
Yeah.
mean, so it's yeah, I don't know. I I think that the the sexual perversity, sexual fascinations that Max has really make some elements of this novel deliberately more awkward than they need to be. But I also feel like he's trying. Liddell is both reflecting a bureaucratic state that progressed the way it did because of events and circumstances, um, but also was fundamentally broken in terms of its ability to engage with reality. It was existing in a reality very distinct from the one that, or a hyper form of reality that took elements of everyone, a lot of the rest of the world, and just went much further than they ever would. You know, like it was anti-Semitism, eugenics, all of it on absolute steroids. And what results, maybe, perhaps this is what Liddell is saying, is folks who can, on the one hand, decry, you know, wartime daylight bombings that kill civilians, while discussing how best to keep people fed, and maybe we just need to kill all the women and children so that we can feed the men more, so they can keep laboring for us. You know, like, or maybe Liddell's not saying any of it. Maybe he just had all, like, this was a fascination, and this is an interest, and he did the research, and this is the result. I don't know. Um, but Jesus, I don't know why this book exists on some level.
I'm not sorry that I reread it. I have to say that I totally didn't remember this ending. Um, I remember. I think I remember the first. Well, this is gonna sound. This is gonna sound a little nutso after what we just talked about, but I kind of remember the parts up until the time when Max gets shot in Stalingrad. I remembered those better.
That takes that, but that makes a lot of sense to me, because a lot of the novel up to that point was a lot of the bureaucratic, a lot of the historical, a lot of like the deep research. And yeah, your suggestion of it being almost split in two makes a lot of sense to me, because after that is where we get into so much. I mean, like, you have the entire. Why would you choose to remember the part about the manor? Like, I wouldn't opt for it. Like, I found myself at times starting to skim it a little bit just to get through it, and then backtracking, me like, ah, shit, I missed something, and then going back to like reread a portion, and then going back to where I was. So like, it's they are in a. I think you're quite right that they are two very different novels. As a, like, the parts of the novel are very different. Given their lengths, they could be two distinct novels. Yeah. So it doesn't surprise me that you held on to the first half much better than the second
and
half.
and block the other stuff. I mean,
But
I yeah, and it could very well be as well that I had never really read anything quite like the first 400 pages or so of this novel, with all of the detail, and just like I'd read lots of World War II novels, but just with this kind of treatment of that material, and the awful story of it all. It felt fresh and different to me.
Have you
But
read Europe? Have you read Europe Central by Volman?
yeah, I have.
It has some passages that are similar to that, but I haven't read that in a very long time, so I'm probably misremembering some of it. So
Yeah, what
that's probably the closest comp I can think of.
I just remember, like, there are lots of that novel seems almost like um, medium length vignettes to me. So, because I know that the one part that I recall best is probably when he goes off and talks about Sostakovich, who of course
Mhm.
was a big important composer during the war. Um, but he gets into kind of like Shostakovich's like personal life and a lot of these things that that, as I'm recalling, weren't really all just on point with respect to the war. But
Right.
it's been a while for me with that one as well, and that's the only Volman that I've read.
Oh, yeah, he's got some good stuff. He's also
Yeah,
got some incredibly long things that I'll never attempt because I don't have the time. But
yeah. There's at least 100,000 pages out there of him that I haven't read, and as I understand it, like soon to be another 100,000 or something. He's got like this 4 volume thing that's supposed to be coming out. I mean, the guy, I don't even know how physically you make yourself type that fast to like have all of this material.
I don't either. But yeah, yeah, that it just occurred to me in terms of like something that like is comp-ish, but it's still not even. I don't know what a good comp for this book would even be at this point.
Yeah,
I yeah,
it in a lot of ways, I think it would be some non-fictional books, just in
yeah.
terms of like the detail and the research. But um, one final question, uh, unless you've got something more. Any thoughts about why the last scene is in the zoo?
Yeah, kinda. I meant to do some research on this before we hopped on and didn't get to it. There was some there's something sticking in my head about the German zoo at the end, the Berlin Zoo at the end of World War II. That like there was some effort made around it. I can't remember what it is. Um, but there's also something about him specifically including hippopotamus and ostriches as the only two animals mentioned that is like, and that I don't know how to research, but it's been kind of sticking in my brain a little bit as no, there's a symbolism to those two animals, and I can't put it together, and that's really annoying me. But um, beyond that, I mean, yeah, you could do all the like literary allusions to like using a cage to murder Thomas and these animals and etc. Um, there it could also be just as quotidian as the tunnel that he was in was very real and it led out to exactly this point. And because Liddell did all of the research, well, it couldn't be anywhere but the zoo, right? So like I can't fictionalize that element to it and put it somewhere else. But there is something about the Berlin Zoo that I'm vaguely remembering. I feel like there might have even been a book about it during my early book selling days at the end of the war. um, but there is also something about the animals, the particular animals mentioned, and I can't figure out what it is. And that's because they're not, the hippopotamus and the ostrich are not like, to my knowledge or to my memory, associated with any specific Greek or Roman gods, um, which would tie into the Furies, right? But yeah. So anyway,
Yeah.
I think there's either a really interesting reason why or just a Liddell's research reason why, probably.
Well, if you come up with reasons, interesting or not, share them on the Substack, because I'm sure that
I'll do
other
that.
people are wondering about the zoo piece as well. Well, Tom, it was really good to talk to you about, yeah, a very weird book, and
And
I'm glad. Go ahead.
I just want to interject. I keep talking about how it's a strange book. I am glad to have read it. I'm glad that you did this such that I did read it. I would not have gotten to this book otherwise. So I mean, I think yes, we can pick at it, tear it apart a bit, what have you. I think it's I don't know that it's a book for every reader, but I think that it's a book that far more readers should probably be giving a shot and grappling with a bit. And if they put it down midway through, they put it down midway through. But it's definitely a book that's worth a shot. So thank you, Lori, for spending the summer reading the kindly ones.
Yeah, very welcome. I agree with you. It's not a book for everyone, and I do know that there are some people that started this book with us and were like, I can't do this book, and I totally respect and get
Yeah.
that. But I found it not to be a waste of time, and there were parts of it that that I found to be I wouldn't say enjoyable, but very admirable. I think that you're spot on when you say that like Littell knows how to tell a story. I very much hope that he's working on a novel perhaps not having anything to do with World War II and this awful scene in history. And actually, I hope that's the case. But I'd be very excited to um, see him take another shot at a big chunky novel about something that he's fascinated with.
I guess my last thought would be I think it's didn't he have one book out after this one? Something shorter or something. I can't remember. I thought he had something after this, but he hasn't had anything in quite a while, right? Um,
The
unless
last thing that I'm aware of that he's had two nonfiction books. He did have
okay,
like a I think a short story collection or something,
yes, yeah,
uh, Fatum Morgana or something like that. And then there's a book that Lawton translated about I think a Nazi criminal, and then another book that was published I think within the last well, at least published in translation within the last 18 months that came out uh, with Fitzcarraldo called An Inconvenient Place. And
okay.
it's about Galicia and this, this kind of horrible area of Poland and Ukraine where, it changed hands 20 times and, was just like the scene of a lot of horrible deaths and killing during the 20th century.
Well, I'm just thinking that since his last big book, that he's had a lot of time to do research. So, dear God, how long could that book possibly end up being by the time all is said and done?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, Tom. Thank you. Have a good one.
Thanks. Bye.